So this first part's always kind of awkward because you're thinking, who is this guy? And I'm thinking, do they know who I am? And you're checking out what I'm wearing, and I'm thinking, should I have worn this? And you're thinking, is this even going to be interesting? And I'm thinking, is this even going to be interesting? It's kind of like a blind date, right? And now you're thinking, blind date, that's kind of an awkward analogy, maybe even creepy. And I'm thinking, yes, that isn't a very good analogy. I probably shouldn't have used it, so just keep going. Act like nothing's wrong, and start this talk like a professional does by maybe quoting from a famous book. Okay. Good morning, students of Carson-Newman College. I recently read a book that made a big impact on me. It's called The Idiot's Guide to Public Speaking. And on page 14, it stresses the need for a public speaker to establish his or her credentials early on in order to gain the audience's trust. So, I am a writer-director of motion pictures, and this is the poster of the first movie I made. It's called The Second Chance. It was distributed in theaters by Sony Pictures Releasing. And you probably can't see the credits all that well, but my name actually appears on that poster 5 times. And this is the poster for Blue Like Jazz. It's based on the New York Times best-selling memoir by Donald Miller. It premiered at the South by Southwest Film Festival in March. It was released in theaters last April. And once again, my name, Steve Taylor, appears 5 times on that poster, for a total of 10 times in 2 movie posters. Now, I'm not saying that any of this makes me an expert on directing movies. Yes, my name appears multiple times on 2 movie posters, but you may not even be planning on seeing Blue Like Jazz tonight. And frankly, I'd like to know why, because that kind of hurts my feelings. Because if you came to my school and wanted to show your movie, I would totally come and see your movie. If I didn't have anything else to do, and if it had stars in it from like Lost and True Blood, and if it was free, I would totally see your movie. But you know, maybe you don't like going to movies. Do you ever listen to music? As Brent said, I used to be a recording artist, but that was before your time. But I also wrote songs for other bands, including this song that I'm going to play a snippet of for you right now. You want to play Name That Tune? Is that going to be fun? Okay, here we go. Anybody recognize it? We'll cut to the chorus. Huh? You heard this song before? If you grew up in a Christian home, chances are you heard that song. In fact, if you grew up in a Christian home, chances are you were forced to sing that song whether you wanted to or not. Now, I'm going to play you another song, and this one you might know even better. We ready? Recognize it? Cut to the chorus. Do you know why that was one of the most popular Christian songs of all time? Because if you sing the words, you get to say hell over and over again. That was my gift to you growing up. You're welcome. And if I still haven't established any credibility with you, if you haven't heard either of those songs or seen either of the movies, I've still got one more. This is a song I produced that was a worldwide pop hit around the turn of the millennium, when all of you were between the ages of 6 and 10, I think. Here we go. Yeah? Cut to the chorus.
Out of the bearded ball. nightly, beside the green, green grass. Swing, swing, swing the spinning step.
I love, when I play that song, all the girls just go, "Aww." If you've never heard that song, you were homeschooled by Amish people. So, let's review what we've learned so far. Oh, wait, we haven't learned anything yet, have we? I want to talk to you this morning about art. And I want to talk to you about courage. So I'm going to call this talk The Art of Courage. And I want to start by talking to those of you in this room who are creative. But I'm not just talking to aspiring filmmakers or musicians or writers or actors or art majors. When I say I want to talk to the creative types, I'm talking to all of you. Now, every once in a while, I'll be in a conversation with some fellow adults, and we're talking about a piece of art that we just saw or watched or heard. And one of them will utter this lie from the pit of hell. "I'd love to do something like that, but I'm just not creative." Really? You're not creative? When did you come up with that idea? Can you imagine being in a room full of kindergartners and you give them each a lump of Play-Doh and tell them to make something, and one of the kids says, "Teacher, I'd love to do something with this, but I'm just not creative." I have never heard a kid say that ever. And if they did, I would punish them by making them sing "Shine" over and over again. Because we are born creative. We were made that way by the Creator. The challenge is not whether or not we've got creativity in us. The challenge is, what are we going to do with it? What are we going to use it for? Now, I was once a college student, like all of you. I went to the University of Colorado at Boulder, which was and still is a pretty radical place. I was studying music and film. Now, either one of those majors on their own was known at the time as the zero job prospect degree. But when music and film are combined into one major, it actually creates a future unemployment vortex, out of which eventually emerges a barista. And yet, I dared to dream. I was working as a youth pastor at the time while I was attending college, and while I loved being a youth pastor, when I graduated, I wanted to pursue a career in music and filmmaking as an artist, entertainer. Now, this confused many of the people in my church, who, like most church people at the time, thought that pursuing a career in the arts was vastly inferior to a career in ministry. In fact, according to their way of thinking, God had a hierarchy when it came to choosing a profession. At the top were evangelists, missionaries, all those in full-time Christian service. The next rung would be doctors, nurses, and other caregivers. Then came teachers, veterinarians, law enforcement, airport security, the guy who invented smoothies, and down near the bottom were artists and anyone else working in entertainment. Then they made things even worse by sending out the not-so-subtle inference that if I had to be an artist, if I couldn't redeem myself, if I couldn't find a more worthy spiritual profession, I could redeem myself by following the church's sub-hierarchy in the world of artistic expression. At the top of the truly Christian pursuits in the arts were all songs that mentioned Jesus by name, followed by end times movies and Amish romance novels, followed by the sequels to end times movies and Amish romance novels. And at the bottom of that list were any forms of artistic expression that allow room for imagination, nuance, and renewing the mind. Am I exaggerating? Not by much. So what's been the result of this utilitarian way of looking at the arts? I'm going to show you two paintings. The first is one that many people, both inside and outside the church, think of as Christian art. It's by the most successful modern painter of our time. His works are in more American homes than any other painter, living or dead. And here is one of the artist's best-known works. Now, take a long, hard look. Is it technically accomplished? Sure. Was it made to glorify God? Well, it says so on the painter's website. Is it glorifying to God? Most of my fellow Christians would say, absolutely. I disagree. Why? Because it's a lie. Forget the purple tree. Forget the fact that apparently the only way to attend this church is to come down by helicopter since there's no path going to the front door. Thomas Kincaid called himself the painter of light, but even his light is a lie. Because the only way you can get windows to light up like that is to set the church interior on fire. This is Christian art? How can that be? Thomas Kincaid claimed, I like to portray a world without the fall, as in the fall of man. But how can a quote-unquote Christian artist create an entire world that avoids our very need for a Savior? Jesus tells us, you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Is this the truth? If it isn't, then how can it be glorifying to God? Here's another painting. In 1937, the Nazis bombed the Spanish town of Guernica in order to test their new aerial weaponry. This was painted by the Spanish artist Pablo Picasso as a response to the destruction of war on innocent lives. Now, Pablo Picasso is not anyone's idea of a Christian artist. To my knowledge, he never publicly expressed any religious conviction. So was this painted to glorify God? Well, we can answer with a fair degree of certainty, no, it was not. Is it glorifying to God? Think about it. The more you study the Kincaid painting, the more ridiculous it looks. The more you study the Picasso painting, the more truth it reveals about the horror of war. One painting tells the truth, the other is a lie, so which one glorifies God? You tell me. Now I'm going to reference two movies. The first is representative of what many people, both inside and outside the church, think of as the model for a Christian movie. It's by the most successful Christian filmmakers of our time. Many of you saw this movie in church. The plot goes something like this. The coach of a Christian high school football team is having a bad year. His team can't win, the parents want him replaced, his car won't start, his wife can't conceive, his home is a mess, he's out of money, and he's a big jerk. Then a mysterious stranger shows up at his office, shares a Bible verse, and tells him the Lord sent him there. And abracadabra, everything starts going right. People love him, the team wins state, he gets a raise, one of the parents gives him a brand new pickup truck, and his wife gets pregnant. And at the very end of the movie, just in case you didn't get the message that God magically fixes everything in your life, we fast forward 2 years to learn that the team's now won 2 state championships and the coach's wife is pregnant again. Does this story tell the truth? Well, maybe if your image of Jesus is this. Although I think the story makes better sense if your image of Jesus is this. But when you put the plot I've just described inside the context of historical biblical Christianity, it doesn't make any sense at all. The plot I've just described is a specifically American wish fulfillment fantasy that only makes sense if it involves a winning lottery ticket or Santa Claus. Now contrast that plot of that movie with another movie you may not have seen. It opens with Robert Duvall playing Max Sledge, a washed-up country singer who wakes up in a rundown Texas roadside motel after a night of heavy drinking. He asks the owner, a widow with a young son, if he can work in exchange for his room. She tells him yes, as long as he doesn't drink during work hours. He resolves to give up drinking, and after a period of struggle, he starts attending church. He eventually marries the widow, and he gets baptized. And that's the point where, unlike the other movie, everything starts going badly. He tries to reconcile with his 18-year-old daughter from a previous marriage, but his ex-wife won't let him see her. He contemplates leaving his new family to restart his singing career. he stays broke. He finally reconciles with his daughter, and then she's tragically killed in a car wreck. At the end of the movie, there's no new car, no state championship, no $1 million recording contract, just Mac back at the old motel with his new wife and son, wondering aloud why God granted him a new life, and yet his daughter has lost hers. Now, how is it that at the end of this movie, with so many things unresolved, I felt hope? 1 Corinthians 5:3 says, we know that suffering produces perseverance, perseverance character, and character hope. Sorry, I knew that was going to happen. That's the truth. But in the Christian movie, where everything went right, where every strand of the story is neatly boxed up inside unicorn gift wrap and a rainbow-colored bow, I felt depressed. Now, I don't mean to pick on these Christian filmmakers. They are my Christian brothers. I have no doubt they're sincere. There's a lot I admire about their resourcefulness in getting movies made. But God doesn't need us to manipulate stories that turn him into Santa Claus. Jesus says, you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. As Christians, we are commissioned to be truth tellers. But telling the truth isn't always profitable. So when our creative output, even if it's marketed as Christian, even if it makes millions of dollars, if our creative output doesn't tell the truth, we have no business making it. Okay, let's pause for a minute, because I know some of you are tracking with me on this. And some of you are thinking, wow, I really like that football movie. I cried. I cried too, but probably for different reasons. But some of you are thinking, okay, I get it. We're supposed to be truth tellers, but what if we're telling truths people don't want to hear? This is where the art of courage comes in. Because when you're trying to tell truths people don't want to hear, it requires courage, but it also requires creativity. Now, the Bible is full of examples like this. From Old Testament prophets trying to find creative ways to tell people bad news without being killed for it, to Jesus, the master storyteller, using creative ways to tell people the good news without being killed for it, until he was killed for it. When I was still in college, I heard a lecture on the art of subversive communication by British author Os Guinness. Using examples from the Bible, he showed over and over again how the prophets used artful, subversive storytelling and communication to get the attention of people who didn't want to listen. Think about Jesus when he was approached and was asked, is it right to pay taxes to Caesar? Now, if he said, no, it's not right to pay taxes to Caesar, then the Roman guards come and take him away. If he says, yes, it is right to pay taxes to Caesar, then his Jewish followers are going to want to stone him. So what does he say? Show me a penny. He shows the penny up, and he says, whose image is this? They say Caesar. And in his artful, subversive way, he says, render to Caesar the things that are Caesar, and to God the things that are God. Master storyteller, artful, subversive, turns the tables. Fantastic example. But in our modern culture, this is where Christians are really dropping the ball. We have this wildly subversive, countercultural faith to proclaim to an American culture that is fixated on excess, success, sexual conquest, and yet we're delivering it in the blandest, least offensive, safe for the whole family style possible. We have tamed Christianity and the teachings of Jesus into this sanitized, homogenized hybrid of sentimentality and wish fulfillment that I don't believe Jesus would even recognize, let alone proclaim as truth. The first definition of the word creative is this: relating to or involving the imagination or original ideas. But listen to this quote from Bob Briner's book, Roaring Lambs. Despite all the fancy buildings, sophisticated programs, and highly visible presence, it is my contention that the church is almost a non-entity when it comes to shaping culture. In the arts, entertainment, media, education, and other culture-shaping venues of our country, the church has abdicated its role as salt and light. Now, those are pretty harsh words. But in all the years I've been using that quote, I have yet to come across anyone who argues the point. Now, some of you might be saying, so what? What's so important about shaping culture? We're here to make disciples. And that's exactly the point. That's why following Jesus' command to be salt is so important. Salt acts as a preservative to meat. It retards the process of decay. We are the salt of the earth, according to Jesus, but if we lose our saltiness, we're worthless. If we're not creatively engaging culture, if we're not showing the world the relevance of Jesus in all walks of life, we're missing our calling. And when that happens in one area, the rest of the plan starts falling apart, which is what we see happening today in our post-Christian society. Being salt prepares the way and preserves the opportunity to share our faith in more direct ways. But when we're negligent, when the culture decays and sharing our faith becomes a lot tougher. And of course, when evangelism suffers, there are fewer people to disciple. Now, this is all pretty obvious stuff, right? But if it was easy, it would be happening a lot more. So what's stopping us? See, I think there's sort of a collective unconscious that exists within the American church. There are certain concepts and ways of thinking that we've almost been conditioned to accept, regardless of our denominational upbringings. If you grew up in church, you eventually just pick this stuff up, regardless of whether or not it's true. One of them I mentioned earlier, the idea that God has a hierarchy when it comes to work, that he views certain vocations as more spiritual than others. It's this mindset that has virtually shut out Christian thought and influence in a number of culture-shaping professions. Another is the way the church tends to unconsciously marginalize or be suspicious of the weird kids. Oftentimes, these are the ones that don't quite fit in, that are drawn to things that are out of the mainstream, that may be a bit eccentric. Imagine a teenage girl who shows up every so often at your church, and she's all gothed out. And every once in a while, she likes to cover herself in mud. And one day she comes to church holding this smelly, moldy, wadded up, rancid t-shirt to show everybody. How comfortable would your church or even your college be with someone like that? If not, we just rejected the prophet Jeremiah, the world's first performance artist. Except he wasn't a girl, and the t-shirt was really his underwear, and I'm not sure he was into goth, but other than that, it was a really good example. See, these are the kids that often become artists. If we show no enthusiasm for their artistic passions, chances are their faith will play no future role in helping shape and inform their career. A third unconscious limiter is directly contrary to Scripture. We're afraid. We read in 2 Timothy that God has not given us a spirit of fear, and yet it's an unspoken, often unconscious fear that keeps us out of culture-shaping careers in the arts and entertainment. We see good models of what it's like to be a Christian and, say, a football star, thanks to organizations like the Fellowship of Christian Athletes, who have been partnering with athletes for decades. But we have a harder time imagining what a committed Christian who's a movie star would look like, or a faithful Christian who's an executive at HBO, or a morally grounded Christian who's a mainstream rap star. Now, a lot of these fears are based on legitimate concerns, right? Imagine a vocation where compromise lurks in even the smallest detail, where it's dog eat dog 24/7, where sexual temptation is a constant threat and the use of illicit drugs is rampant. I'm talking, of course, about the world of investment banking. Because, you see, the business world isn't necessarily any more ethical or moral than Hollywood. It's just got a suit and tie on. We need the mind of Christ for any vocation we pursue, whether it's writing network sitcoms or translating scripture overseas. And finally, there's a very dangerous misperception that's been part of American church culture since before I can remember. We grew up being taught that if we're doing it for the Lord, it doesn't really matter how well we do it. Now, I don't know exactly where we got that. Maybe it's because we're nice people who don't like to criticize, but the fact is that bad, derivative art and entertainment made by Christians is still bad. How many times have you heard this one? Yeah, I know that last Kirk Cameron movie wasn't very good, but God has really used it to bring people to Christ. Now, maybe that's true, but does that justify bad art? Think about it. Can the Holy Spirit not do the same work without the bad art? And while we're at it, when did we as Christians decide that the ends justify the means? It would be like saying, yeah, I know the Spanish Inquisition wasn't very good, but God really used it to bring people to Christ. And by the way, comparing the Spanish Inquisition to most Christian movies is actually a very good analogy, because both happen in dark rooms and involve hours of torture. Now, I'm not trying to be mean here. I'm trying to make the point that if you don't have talent and a passion for excellence, don't bother. We live in an entertainment and media-saturated society. The reason most art and entertainment produced by Christians never finds a world audience is because it's simply not good enough. We've got to do more than wait for the next fad to rip off. And I know this is a charge that frequently gets leveled at Christian media. It's not entirely fair to single us out, because the fact is that mainstream media companies are doing the same thing, from film studios pumping out sequels and remakes, to TV networks mimicking each other's reality shows, to publishing houses looking for the next kid-lit franchise. But I would argue that the mainstream still recognize the value of original voices, which is how a company like Pixar can make a blockbuster telling a story about a rat chef. Do we value originality? When it comes to music, would an original voice even consider signing with one of the big Christian music labels? Not many that I'm aware of. A true artist wants to be where originality is celebrated, not stifled. Now, this is an odd state of affairs because some of our most original artists have been our most successful. Writers like C.S. Lewis, Flannery O'Connor, Marilyn Robinson, musical artists from U2 to Sufjan Stevens to Rich Mullins. Even a kids series like VeggieTales, when it came out, it didn't have any ready parallel. It was so fresh and original. I remember at the time it came out that college students were memorizing silly songs. I remember when I finished most of the songs that became my first album, this is back in the 80s, it was called I Want to Be a Clone. I took a trip to Los Angeles and managed to get meetings with a number of A&R people at mainstream record labels. The music was like a punk new wave hybrid that was getting a good reaction. But their response, for the most part, was, "We like your music, but your lyrics would offend our listeners." So I thought, well, if it's the Christian content that's the problem, I'll try meeting with Christian record labels. And their response was, "We don't like your music, and your lyrics would offend our listeners." 25 years later, the biggest challenge in getting Blue Like Jazz off the ground was that it didn't have a ready parallel. In other words, we weren't remaking an idea that had already proven successful. And then there was this matter of a movie with Christian themes that wasn't, quote unquote, safe for the whole family. Now, I'm all in favor of family entertainment. But the story of Blue Like Jazz takes place on a real campus, Reed College in Portland, Oregon, which the Princeton Review labeled the most godless campus in America. Now, how do you set a story at the most godless campus in America without portraying the reality of what that environment is like? It doesn't have to be R-rated, but it's going to be PG-13. If it's not, it's going to seem a little ridiculous, right? Are we not allowed to tell those stories? Well, if you're a Christian bookstore, the answer is no, you're not allowed to tell those stories, because we can't get in a single Christian bookstore. But this is an odd position to take if you sell Bibles, because a family-friendly version of the Bible would be a much shorter book, wouldn't it? So after 3 years of pitching the movie to literally hundreds of potential investors, most of whom were fellow Christians who believed in the value of engaging culture, we still couldn't get Blue Like Jazz funded. We finally managed to slash the production budget, cobble together enough money just to get the movie shot. We set our production date, and then the night before we were supposed to open our production office, one of our investors dropped out and pulled out $250,000. So now, after 4 years of working with Don Miller, making what we thought was a really strong screenplay, trying to raise money for the last 3 years, I called up Don and I said, "Man, you're not going to believe it, but we can't make the movie. We don't have the money. Well, Don was very disappointed, understandably, and he blogged about it the next morning, as he often does, and he said, listen, everybody, I know you've been wanting to see this movie. I know you're excited about it, but we've been trying for 4 years. We can't get the money together. It's not going to happen. We tried, we failed, we apologize. And then something really remarkable happened. People started writing back saying, come on, you got to make this movie. This is important. Come on, this is something we want to see. I don't have any money, but I could get you like $25. I could get my friends together and we could send you $100. Just please make this movie. And 2 young guys in Franklin, Tennessee actually sent us a video. And in the video it said, look, we don't have any money, but what if you let us start the Save Blue Like Jazz campaign on this new website called Kickstarter.com? Because we think there's a lot of people like us who want to see something different, who want to see something that's true. And if all of us get together, even though none of us have a lot of money, if we each give a little money, you can make your movie. Well, Don Miller called me up and he said, what do you think? You want to meet with them? I said, well, yeah, I don't have anything better to do. So I met with the guys a few days later, and man, they had it all laid out how this was going to work. They were very enthusiastic, they were very organized, they were very idealistic, but honestly, I just thought they were a little naive. And I said, I've been using professionals to try to raise money for this movie for the last 3 years. Now we're going to go out and kind of beg for money for the next 30 days. I said, look, I think this is a great idea, but I checked the website of Kickstarter.com. No movie has raised more than $50,000. We got to have $250,000 in 30 days or we can't make this movie. They said, do you have any better ideas? And I didn't. So they launched the Save Blue Like Jazz campaign, and in 30 days, 4,500 people gave us $350,000 to make the movie you're going to see this evening. And I don't know if you've ever followed a Kickstarter campaign, but it's kind of fun because what you do is you set your project up on a video and then you provide incentives. You say, in our case, give us $25 and we'll send you a t-shirt. Give us $50 and we'll add in a poster. Give us $100 and we'll put your name in the credits as an associate producer. If you come tonight and you watch the movie, when it's over, on the left-hand side, you will see the normal credits, and on the right-hand side, you will see 1,600 associate producers scrolling by quite a bit faster, but you can still see their names. And of course, since I didn't think this was going to work, I said, give us $10 or more, and I will call you and thank you personally. So I ended up with a call sheet of 3,500 names. It took me a year to make the thank you calls. Thankfully, I live in Tennessee, the great state of Tennessee, where we can talk on our cell phones while we drive, so I got a lot of work done driving back and forth to work. But it was an amazing experience to talk to all these people who were so into seeing this movie made, who so much wanted to see it happen. And one of them I spoke to told me how exciting it was to watch the Kickstarter campaign turn into the most successful Kickstarter campaign of all time up to that point. He told me it seemed like it was even bigger than just this movie. It was a movement of a new generation of Christians who want to see us making better art. It seems like the Christian media industry has become all about replicating culture, but we want to be creating culture. And that's my challenge to you. You are creative. Whatever career you pursue, use your God-given creativity to courageously tell the truth. Because when we tell the truth, we set people free. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying any of this is easy. Yes, it starts with talent, but talent has to be matched by a commitment to quality. If you're not willing to put in the time, please don't bother. Earlier, I played You Kiss Me. The writer and band leader Matt Slocum is one of the best songwriters I know. But when he first showed me the lyrics to Kiss Me, they just weren't that good. I circled all the lines that I didn't think were good enough, and I said, I think you can do better. And we went through 5 drafts before Matt finally got the lyric right. Now, Kiss Me is a great song. It's also a wildly successful song. It was #1 in 10 countries around the world. But Matt could have said, hey, I'm already a talented songwriter. This is it. I'm not changing a word. Or worse, he could have said, this is the song gave me, This is the song God gave me. I can't change his work. Every Sunday in church, I sing worship songs that, frankly, I want to circle certain lines, call up the songwriters, and say, I think you can do better. It takes work. There's another part of this. Greatness usually springs up from community. So many of our greatest artists came out of a community of artists. And it can spring up anywhere. All of you as students at Carson-Newman are part of an artistic community right now. Use your community to inspire each other to greatness. Collaborate with each other. Encourage each other. Hold each other accountable to great work. And don't confuse success with quality. They are not the same. When I started the record label called Squint Entertainment, just so we could put out Sixpence's album with Kiss Me on it, we ended up signing some other artists. Some of them were successful. One artist in particular was a band called Waterdeep. If you've heard them, you know how good they are. And that they were our least successful band on our roster. And yet, they never stopped being good. And they're still making music, and they're still writing songs. And next month, Don Schaffer, the leader of Waterdeep, is going to premiere his musical in New York City off-Broadway called Son of a Gun. Because he kept at it, he kept working at it, he kept getting better and better, and he finally won one of the most prestigious awards that are given out in the theater world, the Eugene O'Neill Award, for his work. So don't confuse success with quality. Sometimes they're the same, but quality is always more important. And finally, know your Bible. Grow in your faith. 1 Corinthians chapter 2 tells us how to develop the mind of Christ. Because when we have that, we don't need to make Christian propaganda. The mind of Christ will flow naturally out of the work we do, almost whether we want it to or not. Last Friday night, I was in Chicago at a college, and I've got a friend named Scott Derrickson, who's a filmmaker, fellow Christian. We went to the same college for a year, and he directed a movie called The Exorcism of Emily Rose. Some of you have seen this movie, some of you haven't. That movie scared the pants off me. And Scott, as a Christian, wrote a movie that we certainly wouldn't call a quote-unquote Christian movie, and yet it was one of the most redemptive movies I've ever seen. Well, last week, his movie Sinister opened. Any of you see that movie? That movie totally scared the pants off me. And I actually ended up going with 10 college students because I didn't want to go alone. And Scott Derrickson did not set out, certainly, to make a Christian movie. Nobody would classify Sinister as a Christian movie. And yet, if you watch that movie, I believe the mind of Christ comes out in a number of ways in that movie. Why? It almost has to. Because Scott takes his faith seriously, and it comes out no matter what he does. Now, none of this is easy, but as followers of Jesus, we have no choice. You are the salt of the earth, Jesus tells us, whether we want that responsibility or not. You are the light of the world. Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. Or as that beautifully written song from your childhood says so eloquently, shine. Thank you.